Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, let me tell you something real today. Most people think silence means you gave up. They think if you stop talking, stop explaining, stop asking for answers, that you lost. But let me flip that thinking for you, because sometimes your silence will speak louder than any speech you could ever give. And when used the right way, silence doesn't push him away. It makes him feel everything he's been trying to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Let me slow this thing down and talk to you about silence, because too many people misunderstand it. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not quitting. Silence is not you being scared to speak your mind. Silence, when used the right way, is one of the strongest expressions of self-respect a person can have. See, weakness is when you keep talking to someone who has already shown you they're not listening. Weakness is when you keep explaining yourself to someone who keeps benefiting from misunderstanding you. Strength is knowing when your words are no longer being honored and deciding that your energy deserves better. A lot of people think power comes from raising your voice. They think power comes from having the last word. But real power comes from control, emotional control. Knowing that you don't have to react to everything that tries to pull you out of your character. Silence is discipline. Silence says, I know my worth, and I'm not going to argue it with anyone. When you stop explaining, stop defending, stop justifying, you're not losing, you're leveling up. Here's what happens when you keep talking. You give access, you give comfort, you give reassurance to someone who hasn't earned it. You keep showing up emotionally, even when they show up inconsistently. And the problem with that is this. People don't respect what they don't have to work for. If you're always available, always understanding, always explaining, there's no urgency for change. Your silence interrupts that comfort. It removes the emotional cushion they've been leaning on. Now listen to me closely. Silence doesn't mean you're holding grudges. It doesn't mean you're trying to manipulate someone. It means you've reached a point where you understand that peace is more important than proving a point. You finally realize that your mental health matters, your emotional safety matters. And if someone keeps crossing lines, ignoring needs, or minimizing feelings, the strongest response isn't another argument. It's withdrawal of access. When you go silent from a place of self-respect, your energy changes. You're no longer chasing clarity. You're no longer begging to be heard. You're no longer shrinking yourself to keep someone comfortable. And that shift is felt. People feel when they no longer have the same access to you. They feel when your presence is no longer guaranteed. That's when silence starts speaking. Silence also teaches people how to treat you. When you keep talking through disrespect, you teach them that your boundaries are flexible. When you go quiet and step back, you teach them that there are consequences to neglect, not loud consequences, not dramatic ones, calm ones. And calm consequences are the ones that hit the hardest because they force reflection. Let me tell you something else. Silence protects your dignity. There's nothing powerful about repeating yourself to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you. There's nothing noble about pouring your heart out to someone who keeps letting it spill on the floor. Silence says, I've said enough. I've shown enough. Now I'm choosing me. That choice is strength. And while you're silent, something important happens inside you. You start hearing yourself again. You start noticing how tired you were from overgiving. You realize how much emotional labor you were carrying alone. Silence gives you space to reconnect with your standards, your values, your expectations. It reminds you that love should not require constant explanations. Respect should not require reminders. Some people are afraid of silence because they confuse it with abandonment. But silence isn't leaving. It's pausing participation in dysfunction. It's refusing to keep showing up in places where you're not valued. And if someone truly cares, that silence will wake them up. It will make them think. It will make them reflect. Not because you yelled, not because you begged, but because you stopped. And here's the part most people miss. Even if silence doesn't change them, it changes you. It strengthens you. It restores your balance. It helps you detach from outcomes you can't control. You stop measuring your worth by how someone responds to you. You stop chasing validation. You start standing firm in who you are. Self-respect is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't plead. It simply moves differently. And when you move differently, people notice. Silence backed by self-respect is not empty. It's full of boundaries, full of clarity, full of strength. So don't underestimate your silence. It's not the absence of power. It is power, controlled, intentional, and deeply rooted in knowing who you are and what you deserve. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Let me talk to you about something that makes people uncomfortable, especially in relationships. And that is what happens when you stop explaining yourself. See, most people think communication means talking more. They think if they just say it one more time, in a softer tone, in a longer message, with more detail, then finally they'll be understood. But there comes a moment when talking more doesn't bring clarity. It brings exhaustion. And that's when silence steps in, not as surrender, but as wisdom. When you keep explaining how you feel to someone who keeps missing the point, you're not being patient anymore. You're overextending. You're giving energy without receiving understanding. And the more you explain, the more you train the other person to stay comfortable right where they are. They learn that no matter how they act, you'll still show up with words, emotions, and second chances. Silence interrupts that pattern. Here's the hard truth. When you stop explaining, the other person has no choice but to start reflecting. As long as you're talking, they can stay distracted. They can argue, defend, minimize, or change the subject. But when you go quiet, there's nothing to push against. No debate, no back and forth, just space. And space is where reflection happens. Silence forces accountability. It removes the emotional noise that lets people avoid responsibility. When you step back and stop justifying your feelings, the other person is left with their actions and their choices. They begin to replay moments in their mind. They start noticing patterns they ignored before. They start asking themselves questions they avoided when you were doing all the emotional labor out loud. And let me say this clearly, reflection doesn't happen when someone feels chased. It happens when they feel the absence of what they once had easy access to. People value what they feel they might lose, not what's always available. That's human nature. Silence creates that pause where realization can finally catch up. Now, while they're reflecting, something powerful is happening on your side too. You're reclaiming your energy. You're no longer pouring yourself into conversations that go nowhere. You're no longer trying to convince someone that your feelings are valid. You already know they are. Silence gives you back the time and emotional space to focus on your own peace instead of someone else's understanding. When you stop explaining, you stop negotiating your worth. You stop lowering your standards just to keep the connection alive. You stop chasing reassurance from someone who should be offering it freely. And that shift changes the dynamic. You're no longer operating from fear of loss. You're operating from confidence in self. A lot of people are scared that if they go quiet, they'll be misunderstood. But here's the reality. If someone truly wanted to understand you, they would have done it when you were speaking clearly. Silence doesn't create misunderstanding. It reveals whether understanding was ever a priority. If they reach out with genuine curiosity, accountability, and effort, that tells you something. If they don't, that tells you something too. Silence is also a test of maturity. Emotionally mature people don't need constant explanations. They notice shifts, they reflect, they take responsibility. Emotionally immature people get uncomfortable with silence because it removes their ability to control the narrative. They'd rather argue than introspect. And your silence forces them to sit with themselves. Let me tell you something else. Explaining too much keeps you stuck in cycles. Cycles of hope, disappointment, frustration, and repeat. Silence breaks cycles. It creates a reset. It gives both people a chance to either step up or step away. And either outcome brings clarity, which is something constant talking rarely provides. When you stop explaining, you also start listening to yourself. You hear your own needs more clearly. You notice what you've been tolerating. You become aware of how much you've been compromising your peace just to maintain connection. Silence reconnects you to your intuition. that quiet voice that was getting drowned out by all the conversations you kept having. And understand this, silence isn't about shutting people out. It's about not chasing people who are comfortable with your confusion. It's about stepping back so you can see the situation clearly instead of being emotionally tangled in it. Silence gives perspective. It creates emotional distance where wisdom can grow. At the end of the day, when you stop explaining, you send a powerful message without saying a word. You communicate that you respect yourself enough to not overextend. You show that your time, energy, and emotions are valuable. And that message, delivered through silence, is often the one that finally gets heard. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, let me talk to you about absence, because absence is one of the most misunderstood tools in relationships. People think if you step back, you disappear, or you create space, that you're risking everything. They think absence means you don't care. But the truth is, absence doesn't create confusion. It creates clarity. Noise creates confusion. Constant talking, constant explaining, constant reacting, that's what clouds the picture. Absence clears it up. See, when you're always present, always available, always accommodating, people don't stop to evaluate your value. They get used to you. Not because you're not special, but because familiarity without boundaries turns blessings into background noise. When someone knows you'll always be there no matter what, they stop paying attention to how they show up. Absence interrupts that comfort. When you remove yourself even slightly, the dynamic changes. The room feels different. The phone feels quieter. The routine feels off. And that's when clarity starts creeping in. That's when someone realizes how much space you were filling without making a sound about it. Your support, your consistency, your emotional presence, all the things they didn't acknowledge while you were there suddenly become obvious when you're not. Absence doesn't force someone to miss you. It allows them to. Missing someone requires space. You can't miss what's always within reach. You can't reflect on something that's constantly in front of you. When you step back, you give the other person room to feel the impact of your presence by feeling the lack of it. And while they're gaining clarity, so are you. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Absence gives you perspective. When you're no longer in the middle of the situation, emotions settle. You start seeing patterns instead of isolated moments. You notice what effort looks like without your constant participation. You realize how much you were compensating to keep things going. Clarity comes when emotions calm down, and absence calms emotions. It removes the urgency to react. It removes the pressure to respond immediately. It gives you space to think instead of feel everything at once. That's where wisdom lives, not in chaos, not in constant engagement, in space. A lot of people are afraid that if they step back, the connection will fade, but here's the truth. If a connection only survives when you're over-giving, over-explaining, and over-functioning, then it's not a connection, it's a dependency. Absence reveals whether the bond is mutual or one-sided. And that clarity, as painful as it might be, is necessary. Absence also exposes intentions. When you're no longer initiating, no longer checking in, no longer smoothing things over, you get to see what effort looks like from the other side. You get to see if someone values you enough to step forward when you step back. And that information is priceless. You can't get that clarity when you're always doing the work. Let me say this. Absence is not punishment, it's observation. It's you stepping into the role of awareness instead of participation. You're not trying to teach a lesson, you're allowing the truth to surface on its own. And the truth always comes up when things get quiet. People reveal who they are when there's space to choose. When you're always present, they don't have to choose. You're just there. Absence forces choice. Do they reach out? Do they reflect? Do they step up? Or do they stay comfortable without you? Either way, you learn something real. Absence also helps you detach from outcomes. When you're constantly involved, you're emotionally invested in every response, every delay, every tone. When you step back, you loosen that grip. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's behavior. You start grounding yourself in your own standards instead of their reactions. And here's the thing about clarity, it's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as a calm knowing, a realization that doesn't need validation. Absence gives you access to that calm. It helps you stop chasing answers from people who are showing you the truth through their actions. Sometimes absence shows you that someone values you deeply but got complacent. Other times it shows you that they were comfortable, not committed. Both are important to know. Both save you time. Both protect your future. When you're always present, you absorb confusion. When you step back, confusion separates itself from reality. You stop romanticizing potential and start seeing behavior. You stop hoping things will change and start noticing what actually is. Absence teaches you that you don't need to force clarity. You don't need to demand answers. You don't need to push conversations that go nowhere. Life will show you what you need to know when you give it space to do so. And once you experience that kind of clarity, you move differently. You speak less but mean more. You engage with intention instead of habit. You stop being afraid of space because you understand that space doesn't erase value. It reveals it. Absence isn't about losing someone. It's about finding the truth. And once the truth is clear, everything else becomes easier to navigate. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, let me speak to you about peace. Because peace is the part most people sacrifice without even realizing it. They give up their peace trying to be understood, trying to be chosen, trying to keep something alive that's already draining them. And the truth is, the moment you start valuing your peace more than proving a point, your whole life begins to shift. Silence plays a big role in that shift because silence protects peace. When you keep engaging in conversations that leave you confused, frustrated, or emotionally exhausted, you're paying a price. Every argument, every explanation, every emotional tug of war costs you something. It costs your calm. It costs your clarity. It costs your energy. And when you finally decide to step back and choose silence, you're not avoiding the issue. You're refusing to keep paying that price. Peace doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to convince anyone. Peace is quiet confidence. It's knowing that you don't need chaos to feel connected. It's understanding that love should add to your life, not constantly disturb it. When you choose silence over unnecessary conflict, you're choosing to preserve your inner balance. A lot of people confuse peace with passivity, but peace is active. It's a daily decision. It's saying, I will not allow anyone to pull me into emotional chaos. Silence becomes the boundary that guards your peace. It keeps you from reacting out of emotion and saying things you can't take back. It keeps you grounded. And here's the powerful part. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding dysfunction. Dysfunction needs engagement to survive. It thrives on arguments, emotional responses, and constant attention. Silence starves it. When you don't participate, the cycle low says its energy. And in that quiet, you regain control of yourself. Choosing peace also means accepting that not everyone deserves access to your thoughts and feelings. Just because you can explain yourself doesn't mean you should. Just because you have emotions doesn't mean everyone gets to handle them. Silence becomes discernment. You become selective about where you invest your emotional energy. Peace brings clarity. When you're calm, you think clearly. You notice patterns. You see behavior without excuses. You stop justifying things that don't sit right in your spirit. Silence helps you hear your intuition again, the voice that was drowned out by all the noise of overthinking and overtalking. When you prioritize peace, you stop chasing closure from people who can't give it. You stop needing answers from those who are inconsistent. You realize that sometimes the lack of response is the response. Silence helps you accept that without resentment. And let me say this, peace is attractive. People notice when you stop being reactive. They feel the shift when you're no longer emotionally available for chaos. Some will respect it. Some will be uncomfortable with it. And that reaction tells you everything you need to know. Choosing peace doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to not live in emotional turmoil. It means you understand that your well-being is not negotiable. Silence reinforces that understanding every time you choose not to engage in something that disturbs your spirit. When you protect your peace, you also protect your future. You make better decisions. You attract healthier connections. You stop settling for less because you're no longer operating from emotional exhaustion. Silence clears the mental clutter so you can see what truly aligns with you. Peace is not something someone else gives you, it's something you claim. And silence is often the doorway to claiming it. It's you saying, without saying a word, I choose calm, I choose clarity, I choose myself